Assalamu alaikum and welcome to all of you for this evening's talk. We've got a speaker today. It's Max Heimendorf who's joining us. Unfortunately, one of the other advertised speakers is unable to attend. She was taken ill yesterday. I think she broke her toe. But Max will hopefully be able to address some of the topics that she was going to sort of talk about. The focus is on education and in particular how really socio-economic background affects that. In the UK there's a very strong correlation between essentially the poorer children are not necessarily afforded to the best education, and there is a correlation between the wealth and the economic background of the parents and the educational attainment of the children. And essentially the talk today is to discuss some of the issues why that may be. Max will talk about his experiences there, as well as touch upon some of the policies as well, which the new government, Michael Gove, is looking to introduce to obviously try to tackle this. Just briefly to introduce Max and talk a bit about his background. He was part of the first cohort of Teach First teachers and then moved into secondary education to teach science and then became head of year 8. He then moved on into industry to work for a management consultancy, but then returned back into education full-time and then actually took the position of a head teacher at the King Solomon Academy, which is just around the corner, I believe. So Max will talk for about, I think, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Again, if you do have any questions, I think he's quite keen to make it more of an interactive session, so maybe sort of any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll also touch upon the educational projects that the City Circle charity run, primarily the Saturday School, where that is now and going forward, and obviously potential for people getting involved there as well. But just over to you, Max. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know how loud that is. So I've been introduced, but I think it's great to be here tonight and to be so close to our school and to be talking to people who aren't part of our school but probably are very close to it geographically. So we're just the other side of the Marylebone Road on Penfold Street, so about 200 metres away from here. And King Solomon Academy is a new start school, and it was started by a group of people who wanted to change the way things were in education. And I'll talk a bit about that in a minute and about what our school's like. Just to kind of pick up on a couple of things about me, I was, when I was appointed to be head teacher at King Solomon, I was the youngest secondary head teacher in the country at 28. And I stupidly allowed the newspapers to take a photo of me, and I was on the front page of the Times educational supplement. And I'm very young looking, but this was a particularly young looking photo. And I'm surprised that the parents still thought that this was a good idea, sending their children to our school. But obviously I've learned a lot over the last 6 years, so hopefully I can share a bit of that. So I wasn't going to talk so much about the problem, the policy problem, but because the other speaker wasn't here, I thought I would, because that gives some context. So I'm going to start by trying to, in lots of different ways, talk about what the problem is. And it was really beautifully summarised there. The problem is that children from poor families get a worse education, and they get worse educational outcomes. So we want to look into that and say, well, what's actually going on? Is that true in every way? And in what ways is it true? So this is a classic study that was done many years ago, and it took 4 groups of children when they were 22 months old. So they were just almost 2 years old. And they measured, are they kind of clever children at 22 months? And obviously at 22 months children can't do that much, but you can still say these ones are doing well, these ones aren't doing so well in some developmental things. Can they make eye contact? Can they respond to their name? Things like this. And what they did is they looked at the children who were from richer homes and from poorer homes. And they looked at those that at 22 months were doing well and weren't doing so well. So here, the top line is the children who were from richer homes and were doing quite well when they were 22 months. And the second line is the children who were doing well but were from poorer homes. So I might just point and shout a little bit. So this top one are the ones who were from rich homes and were doing well. So they carried on doing well all the way through. They were always the best in school. The next line was those that they started off really good, but they were from poorer homes. The third line is those from rich homes, but they started off doing badly. And the last line is those who were doing badly and from poor homes. And what you can see is the ones from rich homes who were doing badly, by the time they're 10 years old, have overtaken the children who were doing well from poorer homes. So what this says is, whether you're a doing well child when you're 2 years old, it doesn't matter. All that matters is, are you from a rich home or a poor home? And that, to me, was really mind-blowing when I realised that. And that's what the data shows. And what's really sad for me is these children who, when you measure them at the 22 months, they're doing really well. But then something happens to them that means they end up doing much worse. So that's one of the things we need to get into, is what happens. And just in case you think 1970, yes, sir?
Sorry, is that okay to interrupt?
Please, yeah, great.
Where did you get this data from?
So it's Feinstein 2003. I didn't find it myself, but I'm reliably handed it by an organisation called Teach First, which is the teacher training provider that got me into teaching. And if you look at what's happening now in 2000, they're repeating this experiment, and sadly they're seeing exactly the same thing is happening. It's completely replicated. So that's bad. That means that we haven't solved this problem. There's lots of slides here. I don't want to necessarily talk about any of them, all of them, sorry, but this is a really interesting one. This is, I know it's a bit small from where you are, but this shows how equal or unequal is society in terms of their kind of wealth. And what you can see is the UK is one of the most unequal societies in terms of economics. And here, this is how easy is it to kind of become better off? How easy is it to become socially mobile? And what you can see is only Portugal is worse than us in the whole of Europe at this. We're one of the worst few in terms of how unequal things are, as in the rich have a much better life than the poor. And then we're also the second worst at actually changing that, at people being able to change their position. So that's another way of saying this is a problem. So we've seen so far, it's unfair on children, and it's a big problem in our country. Okay. As I said, there's lots of data. Okay, so when we start looking at how do things work when schools are children get to secondary school, and you can see this kind of data. And what this does is it says, do the families live in poor homes or rich homes? And on the right-hand side are those that live in poorer homes. And on the left-hand axis, you've got how they do at secondary school. And what you can see is there's a correlation. And it's not 100% always true, but there is a correlation. And so that shows at the school level as well. And from my experience of working in kind of tough schools, there are many, many reasons for that. But for me, the principal one, when I talk about King Solomon Academy, I talk about this, is about expectations. So I was very lucky. My parents chose to send me to a very good private school. And when I was there, my parents and my teachers expected me to go to university. And my experience of tough schools is that nobody expects children in them to do well as well. There isn't a level of expectation. The children are expected to be naughty, they're expected to truant, they're expected to do badly. So that's one of the problems that I'm going to come on to later. Okay, there's lots of different versions of this, but given I've only got 20 minutes, I'm not going to talk about all of it. Okay, so this is really interesting. This is how much time are children watching TV? So isn't that fascinating? When they're age 3, if you come from a low-income home, 27% of 3-year-olds are watching more than 3 hours of TV a day. And if you go to the richest homes, it's only 5%. So that's interesting. And then you say, aged 5, who's taking their children to museums or galleries? And it's 89% of richer homes and 57% of lower income homes. And so what you start to see is that it's when we say that being poor and having low educational outcomes is a truth, that's a pattern we see, well, we can actually start to look down and we can say, well, actually there are things happening that affect that. It's not like the children are going to do badly because of their genes. And if we go all the way back to the beginning, you remember there were still children from poorer homes who were very clever at 22 months. It's not because of their genes. It's because of their experiences. It's because of what's happening, their nurture. Okay. So, what's sad as you kind of go older and the children get older is that this gap really opens up. So one of the key measures is some of you may know, is called free school meals. Is the family income below about £16,000, and that means they get free lunch at school. And if they get free lunch, that's like a really clear label. They're from a lower income home. And when you look at the outcomes of how many get 5 A star to C, including in English and maths, so that means they get the basic GCSEs, the very basic GCSEs. The really sad thing is that the children who are on free school meals, the children whose families are poorer, only 27% of them get 5 A star to C, including English and maths. And so if you take, let's say you had a school and all of the children were poorer homes, what's that saying on average is only a quarter of them are going to get the basic education. And that makes me so angry. That's so unfair, because if we look back at the beginning, we know that the children, when they're 2 years old, are not any different to the rich kids. But only a quarter of them get basic GCSEs. So, in my view, my reaction to that is we as society and we as schools are failing children. It's not that these children can't do it, it's that we're not enabling them to do it. So that's also one of the things that is behind our school. Okay. And we know that if you go to certain types of school, you end up with much better outcomes. What can I? Yeah, I don't want to. Here we go. This is another slide that I think is really telling. I know it's very small and it's very hard to see, so I'll just sort of explain it by pointing again, perhaps. So I know it's very hard to see, but this shows the free school meal pupils, and over here is children from independent schools, so where their parents are so well off that they're paying for private school. And I know it's very hard to see the bits, but basically the size of the bar is what percentage of children end up in different places. And if you look at the top bar, the dark green one, in independent schools, 43% of 48%, check my eyes, of those children end up in the top 30 universities in the country. So places like Oxford and Cambridge and LSE and Bristol and Manchester, all those places, half of the independent school children end up at those. And what happens to children from poorer homes? Only 2% end up in those best universities. So in every level, from 5 years old to 8 years old to 11 years old to 16 years old to 18 years old, there's a huge problem. And for me, one of the main problems at the end of it all is that very few poorer children get to go to top universities. And I think living in Westminster, as many of you might, Westminster is actually the best place in the whole country for getting poorer children into university. So, if there's a problem here, the problem's 10 times worse across the rest of the country. And actually, I think about 50% of children in Westminster go to some sort of university when they're past 18. So in Westminster, because of the money, because of the opportunities, because of the focus that the politicians give London, there's good things happening. But the real sad thing is if you're in the middle of nowhere, out in the north somewhere, there's nothing happening. And that's one of the main things the government is worried about, is that now London is better than the rest of the country, and it used to be worse than the rest of the country. Yes?
You sort of said Westminster get more money, but surely the budget has to be distributed equally. Is it a per student per...
So you'd think so, wouldn't you? You'd think that a school in Bradford gets the same amount of money to educate as a child in London, and it's actually completely different. It's so a school in London, let me just to pick numbers, I don't think is accurate. They might get something like £8,000 in total with all the bits and bobs to educate a child, and a school in Bradford might get £5,000. And you could say that's fair because to employ teachers in London might be more expensive, but I don't think the difference is fair. But also, I think there is a reality that it's very easy for Michael Gove to visit my school, and so it's kind of good for the politicians to have good schools in London, because then they can walk around looking like they're doing good schools. But they're not going to visit a school in Bradford, so they don't pay it as much attention. I think it's the sad truth of things. And so for me, this university thing has been a real passion for me. I mean, when I was really lucky, I got to go to Oxford University, and I met lots of different people there, and some of them have gone to state schools and some of them gone to independent schools. But it's a cliche, but I honestly felt it was the best time of my life. It was I learned the most, I enjoyed the most, I made the best friends, it was brilliant. And sometimes it can be quite patronising for people who go to university to say, oh, because I enjoyed university, everybody should go to university. So what's really helpful for me is to think about, well, is it just that I think everybody should have the chance to go to university because I enjoyed it? Or is it actually the right thing to give everybody the opportunity to do? And what's interesting is the more educated people are, this is what this slide shows, the more educated they are, the happier they are. That's like all the surveys show you that. So actually, if all we care about is whether people are happy, we should also educate them, not just for some other reason. And we know that the more you study, the more educated you are, the more you earn as a family, the better healthcare you have, the better healthcare your children have, the better education your children have. So education really is the silver bullets. Education is the thing that can make all the difference to everybody. And this is average lifetime earnings. So this is how much people earn depending on their education. And you can see if they go to Russell Group University, which is one of the best 30 universities in the country, they'll earn £706,000 over a lifetime on average. And if they just kind of leave school at 16 with some OK GCSEs, they'll earn just over half of that. So that's important as well. Okay, I don't want to spend. Okay, good. So yeah, there's a lot of information here. I know I'm short on time. Okay, good. So I want to talk to you about my school a bit, because we're trying to change that situation. And so it might be interesting to talk about how we're trying to change that situation. And I can start that now. So firstly, I just thought I'd show you some pictures of our school so you don't think that I'm making it up. So yeah, I'll just show you some pictures. Various children. And I think there's a quote from Michael Gove somewhere as well, which is always nice. And you might see some interesting things in there. You might see some things that if you had to guess, is it an independent school or a state school, you might think, okay, maybe this isn't the average state school. You might recognise some universities as well. Okay, so those are a quick snapshot of our school. And our school was started because the teachers there, me and the governors, the people behind it, believe that all the things I just showed you are unfair. They're not justice. They're not fair. They're not good for families. They're not good for society. And that the reason why poorer children and poorer families don't get great education is not set in stone. It does not have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. So we started a school with one clear mission, and that mission is here. It's to provide a rigorous and transformational education that prepares pupils for success at university and beyond. And one of the things our school does, not everybody agrees with this in education, is we say very clearly, we're here to get you to university. We're not mucking around. We're not saying that it's equally good to be a plumber as it is to go to university. And some people are offended by that. Some people think, like, what's wrong with being a plumber? And there's nothing wrong with being a plumber. Lots of plumbers make lots of money, and lots of plumbers are very happy. But if you study with the goal of getting a great education and going to university, you've got options. If you decide when you're 14 you want to be a plumber, you might not have many options when you're 18, because you might not keep your options open. And And therefore, I think it's the right thing to do to give every child the opportunity to go to university and for them to have the choice about what they're going to do with that opportunity when they're 18. And what's interesting is they did a survey of parents when the children were born, and 98% of all parents across all social classes, all races, if you ask them when their child's born, do you want your child to go to university, 98% of parents say yes. And then what's really sad is if you ask them when they're 10 years old, the number's lower. The parent says, I don't want my child to go to university. And then when they're 15, it's lower still. And what that for me is about expectations. It's about what the families want and what does society tell them that they can have. So,
also,
yes.
It's very expensive to go to university now.
Okay. So I think I would argue lots of things about that. So the first is that the vast majority of the costs to go to university are loans that you don't have to pay until you're earning above a certain amount of money, which is a decent amount of money, £20-something thousand. And it's money that if you don't earn that, you never have to pay back. And it's money that it's an investment that you'll get to live off for the rest of your life, your education. And if you're from a poorer home, there are grants that you can receive that you don't have to pay back. And I think, I'm not saying it's not without its challenges, but I think any wise adult, educated wise adult, if they were counselling their child, they would say, it's worth it. You should go to university. And so actually our job as educators, as parents, as society, is to explain to pupils, teenagers, that actually to explain it in such detail, with such clarity, that they make that choice, that it is worth it.
I teach university students,
Okay.
and a lot of them who are from poor backgrounds
Yes.
do drop out because of the disadvantage. I appreciate that, but and obviously I teach slightly longer degree, so, but I find that once then, it's £9,000 a year. I don't know the exact cost, so I might be sort of making things up, and actually that can be a bit insurmountable.
Sure. So yeah, that's not £9,000 they need to hand over in cash or write a cheque for or get their parents to pay or anything like that. It's £9,000 that when they're earning a decent amount of money will be taxed off their income. That it's a small amount of repayment. Yes.
I was going to say, if we still decide to be part of Europe, why don't we encourage children to go into other EU countries where it costs £500 a year to study in Germany, and you learn French as well, studying in Netherlands?
So that's a great question. I guess are they prepared to be successful in those environments? That's it's one of the things that I ask myself a lot is how am I going to stop the children in my school dropping out of university? Because it's all very well getting them good grades, but if they don't have the character and the skills and the resilience and the ambition to be successful there, then they're not going to be successful. And similarly, the question about sending them to Germany, what does a teenager need to be like to be able to pull that off? And that's something I probably haven't spent enough time thinking about. But I agree that if we could prepare children to be successful, yes, sir.
Sorry, let me finish there.
Just if we can get them to be successful and prepared for that, then I agree that that's a very valid choice.
Personally, from my experience, just a bit about myself, just to say, is that in my family, I was the first to be academic in my family, but I suffered from dyslexia, and peer group was quite suffering in that sense. But I managed to get an MA. I'm thinking of studying further. But the thing is, though, what I realised at a later level of my education was that to monetize, or basically what you learn, make it into an income. And it's basically, I suggest to say, look, maybe look for Arts Council funding to bring in artists and say, look, creative industry has got funding to still support you, and say, look, here's a model. Like, for example, I'm a children's librarian now. I'm taking the idea from what you say into a book, and then basically we did a black and white version, a grayscale, now we did a colour version, then reduced it down because of the constraints of budget. But then show you those skills and say, look, as an author, people pay their mortgages. As an illustrator, they pay their, so you can be like different teams of taking on that board, but taking that on board, but then saying, look, now it's going to be in the shop. You've got intellectual property where if you get a publisher, they'll publish it on order. Basically, you get an income and basically your family will get an income from it. Whether it's 22p a week, but you can build up the profile through free off-the-shelf tools like Facebook and Twitter. Kids are involved in that already. And then to show them that model, to say, look, here's an artist that will take you through that journey over a period of time. Say, look, even in a homework club or something like that in your school. And that's an idea to take on in a sense. And I'm interested in developing that myself. But maybe I can talk further about that later.
Thank you. So just to talk a bit more about our school. So we serve an economically deprived community. These figures only for update this year, but we did the Adachi Index. That's an index of deprivation. It measures various measures of deprivation. And you can put in postcodes, and it tells you which percentile the postcodes are in terms of deprivation. So when we put in our postcodes, 65% of our postcodes were in the 1% most deprived postcodes in the country. And what that shows me is that the families we serve are from poorer homes. And this is a different version of a similar chart I showed before. This for me that really gets me kind of ready to do some hard work. So this is free school meals along the bottom, the percentage of the school which have free school meals. So if you had served a poorer community, you might have 50% of your children have free school meals. And if you served a more affluent community, you might have 20% or 10% or 5% have free school meals. And then along this axis is all of the A star to C results. So it's what percentage of your children in the school get the basic English and maths and the other subjects. And what you can see is if you've got a richer community with less free school meals, there's a big range, but there's lots of schools that do really well. And they're often the selective schools, these are secondary schools, they give a test at 11, and they say, we're going to take the clever children. And what we've already seen is generally the clever children are from richer homes. When I say clever, of course, I mean the ones who have been educated more, rather than their genes are cleverer. But what you can see is there's a big gap here, over here. So this is where you've got communities or schools where there's a lot of free school meals, and you're looking and seeing, well, where's the school where there's a lot of children doing well when there's free school meals? And what you can see is when you get above 45-50%, there are, slightly out there, there's one or two schools now that are, but there's very, very few schools who are doing it. So when we started King Solomon Academy Secondary in 2009, we thought, well, we have to do something radically different to other schools, because no other school is doing what we want to achieve. No other school is getting 100% of children to top universities. So we didn't just copy other schools, we did something very different. So our model, our school, is different to other schools. The first thing is that we built it small. And we built it small because we wanted to feel like a family and like a team. And we wanted all the adults and all the children to trust each other and know each other. And we didn't want them to slip through the cracks. We didn't want anyone to just be a number. So we're just 60 pupils per year group. And other secondary schools are often over 100 children, 180 children, 200 children in a year group. And then the second thing we said is we want them to all get academic qualifications. We're going to teach them English and maths so well that they can do all their subjects really well. And then the third thing is we're going to create a mindset, and we call it whatever it takes. And if you walk up Penfold Street, which is just over there, you'll see our big banners outside the school, huge banners that say whatever it takes. And if you walk into the entrance, you'll see a big banner that says climbing the mountain to university. And every single day when the children walk into school and they shake my hand, then they see that, and hopefully they know why they're here and why we're working hard. So it's about building a culture that we're going to get somewhere. And then we're really clear about our mission, which is we're going to get every child to university. That's why we're here. And we might not, if we don't do it, we're going to do everything we can, and we're going to get very close. So what does that mean in practice? Well, the first thing is we have a very long school day. So other schools have a school day from about 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And we have a school day from 7:55 It's actually, I need to update this, it's 4:30 p.m., 7:55 to 4:30 p.m. So our children are getting 3 hours extra a day of learning compared to children in other schools. We then set a lot of homework. So a lot of schools talk about homework, but we're absolutely relentless about it. We set a lot of homework. We have, depending on what's going on, we have some Saturday school, and then also for the last 5 years we've run a summer school where the children come in the summer. And then what do I expect from my teachers? I expect them to work very long hours. I expect them to join me and visit families' homes before the children come to us, so we can get to know the families. And I expect them to all carry a work mobile phone, which the children can call them for help with homework until 8:30 p.m. And some people hear this and they think, well, your teachers are crazy and you're crazy. And the thing is you could describe us as crazy, but I'd say we're highly motivated to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And we think it's worth it, because actually, if you go to schools serving tough communities, deprived communities, often teachers are working crazily hard anyway, but they're firefighting. So what I mean by that is they're constantly responding to trouble, to fights, to people being in danger, things like this, and bad behaviour. And so what we say to our teachers is, you're going to work really hard, but you're not going to be managing behaviour. You're not going to spend your time arguing with children. You're going to come into school and you're going to teach them, and they're going to learn, and we're going to have such a strong approach and such a positive approach that our families and our children and our teachers are going to work together as a team. Okay, and how did it go so far? So we've got, yes?
Sorry, we can do questions at the end. What's easier for you?
I don't mind.
Okay. Sorry, just in terms of behaviour, I've just started a teaching course myself, and it's direct, so I'm very new into it, formally new into it. Low-level disruption behaviour is a big problem.
That's right.
Do you mind just expanding a little bit on what you guys do
Sure.
to manage that?
So the question was about what do we do about behaviour? Because lots of children from lots of different homes and lots of different races and religions and everything else, all children, if they're in the wrong environment, will misbehave and get distracted. And what we try and do is create the environment where that doesn't happen. So our basic approach is explicitly and minutely tell children how we want them to be, and then praise and reward them systematically, consistently, in every possible way for doing that. And on the flip side, when they have had the expectations made so clear and there's so many people being rewarded for getting it right, if they then make mistakes, even if they're small mistakes, we're relentlessly consistent about holding them to account for those. So our general approaches are consistency, clarity of expectation, and enthusiastic reward for doing the right thing. And what does that look like? It means that in our summer school, for example, we spend basically 2 weeks training the pupils about how we want them to be in school. So something like how to set up their desk, we'd spend 2 hours teaching them how we want them to set up a desk. About how to walk through the corridors, we'd spend many, many hours teaching them how we want to walk through the corridor. If you get to a door, do you open that door? Do you let it slam on the person behind you? Do you hold it for them? If you hold it for them, how are you holding it for them? If someone holds the door for you, do you thank them? How do you thank them? If you get to a classroom, how should you wait? We teach everything, and that sounds like we're training robots and everything else. But actually, you do that once, and then you don't have to have conversations about people running down corridors hitting each other on the head, because you've been talking about small stuff. So that's our basic approach. So how's it been going so far? So we measured the progress of the children, and it's quite hard when the children haven't yet taken 8 GCSEs, because you don't have real exam results. You have to do special tests and say, okay, well, how's our school doing against other schools? And what we see is that if we compare the national progress in English on the left and maths on the right against our progress, you can see even with our first group, who to be honest know everything that we know now about how to educate our children. But even with them, we were doing much, much better than the average. So that to me suggests that we're doing well. And I think, I've got a couple of other things to say, which is that we're now up to our year 11. So this summer we're going to have GCSE results. And to give you an idea of what we're sort of aiming for, if we were going to achieve our mission, which is to every child to be able to go to university, then we would need to get, for a starting point, we need to get 100% of the children 5 A star to C. So on that graph I showed you, we'd have to be quite far along to the right, and we'd have to be right at the top of the graph. But the problem for me is the expectations are too low. So that graph measures A star to C. But if you get a C at GCSE, you can't access A-levels. If you want to do maths A-level and you get a C in GCSE, you're going to fail maths A-level. It's just too hard for you. So actually what we need to measure is A star to B. How many of the children are getting Bs and above at GCSE? And so our real goal is 100% of children getting that. And if I tell you that across the country, last year in science, for example, nationally, something very low, like only 15% in one of the science exams of children from tougher schools got Bs, and we want 100% to get. So what we're doing is very difficult, but that's what we're trying to do. And I guess just to cover off a couple of things that I was asked to speak about. So what's the government doing? Because obviously I'm telling you about our school, King Solomon Academy, and we're trying to do some special things our way. But what is the government doing? So the government's probably doing, I'd say they're doing two main things, probably. The first is that they are doing something called the Pupil Premium. So this is a Liberal Democrat and Conservative agreed policy when the coalition formed. And they said, we're going to pay schools more if they have children who have ever, in the last 6 years, been on free school meals. So either they're poor now, or they've been poor in the last 6 years, their families, we're going to give the school extra money. And I said, when you asked, how much do different schools get? So let's say a school gets £7,000. So the Pupil Premium it's at the moment, I think it's a bit above £1,000. So if you have a child from a poorer home, you get, instead of getting 7,000, you get 8,000. And the government wants to take that to 9,000. And so what that would mean is it would be schools who are serving poorer families get more money. And that is one way that you could address this whole thing. Because what a school could then do is it could spend more money doing some of the things that we do, like sending children on residentials to universities, or giving them all a string instrument so they can be part of a string orchestra like we do, or run a long school day like we do. You could do all of these things, you have freedom to do it because you've got more money. So that's one thing. And because the government hate throwing money around, they hate spending money, of course, what they're doing at the moment is they're getting very, very upset and worried that the schools aren't spending the money in a way that's going to make a difference. So now schools are having to do a lot of reporting about how am I spending this money, which is not a bad thing in itself, but it shows you that the government doesn't think it's definite that if you give schools serving poor families more money, that they will definitely do something good with it. And then the other policy is the one that gets a lot of attention, which is the free school policy. And basically the government is saying to communities, to families, to teachers, to charities, you could go and set up your own school. If you think that schools aren't good enough, go and set up your own school and we'll give you money to run it. And that's quite a risky thing to do because you might let the wrong people start a school and it might be really bad. And it's quite hard to, before you've given people a chance to run a school, it's quite hard to tell whether they're going to be any good at it. And this is one of the reasons why there aren't that many people like me, because if you said, would you give most 28-year-olds the chance to run a school from scratch when they've never been a head teacher, most people might say, that sounds very risky. I mean, it might be a good idea, it might be a bad idea, but it's obviously a risky thing to do. And the reason why I was allowed to do it was because I had a lot of support around me from people who knew a lot about what they were doing. So the school's part of a network of schools called ARC schools. ARC stands for Absolute Return for Kids, and they have a network of 27 schools. And so if I was making mistakes or didn't know what to do, I had people who I could call upon for advice. And one of those people is the guy who's now the head of Ofsted, Michael Gove, who before that worked for ARC. So I could get the guy who basically knows more about how to be a good editor teacher than anyone to give me advice. So I think I was in a very lucky position there to be able to do things a bit different, but also have some credibility to do things differently, and that was really helpful. So those are kind of some things about my school and some things about policy, but I'll be very keen to answer any questions and hear from you.
Thank you very much, Max. Just before we move on to the Q&A, I was just going to touch upon some of the stuff City Circle are doing on education, and I think what's interesting actually is there are a lot of similarities, I think, in our Saturday school and our approach, or we certainly like to think so, and we try to strive that way in terms of what's happening at King's Solomon Academy. Now, I think most of you are sort of aware of what's going on with our schools, but I'll just give you a quick update. So we run essentially 2 supplementary schools, one based in Harrow, one based in West London, near Ladbroke Grove. The one in West London has been running now for about 12-13 years, and that covers children from the ages of year 4, which is about 8 years old, up to actually A-level. We do A-level maths, but the core sort of offering is up to really GCSE. And the focus is really twofold. And the school in Harrow has sort of only been running for 2 years, and that focus is sort of year 4 up to year 7, with a view to obviously expand it as we go forward. But the focus is really twofold. One is a purely academic approach, and similar to the King's Solomon Academy, we at the start of the year, when we address parents and we speak to them, we have sort of an unashamed target that every child who will join us and stay through the process in year 4 up to their GCSEs, we guarantee a B grade, and that's obviously including the really challenged children. And the idea being that really what we try to do is we focus on areas where they really need the development in literacy and numeracy, and we think that if we can tackle those at a young age, and we can sort of really get to some of the issues that sort of are there, then when it comes to sort of their GCSE year, then obviously exam technique and so forth can actually then help them get to the higher grades. But if the basics are missing, then it's very difficult. And that's why we also focus specifically on literacy and numeracy. So several years ago we did offer science as well, but what we were finding is the children who were actually opting for science, really they weren't strong enough in those basics. And actually, certainly up to GCSE level, if you've got a grasp of numbers, if you've got a grasp of maths and English, the other subjects actually do fall into place, certainly at sort of, again, the school leaving level. The other target, other than obviously the pure academic, is sort of the pastoral care, which again Max talked about, and the discipline angle. And what we try to again tell parents is that for that 1 or 2 hours a week on a Saturday, what we do try to offer is a similar experience that the children would hopefully have if they did have the opportunity to go to the best schools in the country, to a private education. So we keep class sizes small, we have high expectations in terms of discipline, high expectations in terms of attendance and so forth. And obviously the teachers that are dealing with the children, have again professional backgrounds as well. Although very few, if any, actually have a formal teaching qualification. And that pastoral care then we try to nurture and develop. So it's not just then about sort of behaviour, but then it's trying to encourage them to give back to the community. And we have a lot of initiatives on that front. So we have the newsletter that was started last year, which is essentially a sort of school letter that the children engage in just to sort of work on. We have a community project where the older children actually look to fundraise to support a school in rural Pakistan. So they work together to really start to think about, skills that will obviously help them, but it's about them thinking about giving back. We've got a lot of other initiatives like a careers workshop that we have the mentoring session as well, and then sort of I suppose the final kind of icing on the cake is then the children that then eventually go on and do their GCSEs and A-levels when they're going to university, especially if they're London based. Many of them come back to actually then teach at the school, and that's I suppose for us as evidence of some kind of success. And in fact I think in a specific case one of them is actually helping manage one of the projects we do. In terms of, I think, particular sort of focuses and achievements we've had going forward, or in the recent sort of years, I think we've certainly in West London we've launched now a separate sort of partnership with Imperial College. On Wednesday evenings we have additional maths and science lessons for GCSE, which again, what's interesting is, as I said, one of the former students now manages that and sort of coordinates with the teachers, and so obviously has benefited from the education, but also from the other skills that are probably necessary to move forward as well. In terms of now going forward and how we're trying to take these 2 schools forward, So these schools are actively, sort of people involved with the City Circle are actively involved in running these, managing these schools. But what we've tried to do, and it's sort of almost brought about by a discussion we've had by some sort of people in the Slough community, is we're trying to think about more of a partnership model going forward. So we have some experience in supplementary schools, I'd like to say, sort of in terms of policies, in terms of what doesn't work. You know, we've made mistakes and hopefully learned from them. We've got a good grasp of in terms of working now to be a syllabus that is effective in that small space of time. So we're trying to now share that with other people. So, for example, in Slough, they run a sort of more traditional Islamic school where they focus on the Islamic sciences, but they've obviously, through their experience, realised there is a need to focus on literacy and numeracy within the community as well. So they want to build on that. So what we can offer to them is obviously, you know, our lesson plans, obviously our policy, procedures, advice, and work almost in a, if you think about the commercial sense, like a franchise. So obviously they would take much of the responsibility of the day-to-day running, but we can give the advice and share, you know, experiences we have, you know, again, like I said, what does work, what doesn't work. Because I think, again, that we've certainly made a lot of mistakes through the period. We've learned from them, we've built on them, and we know sort of where we can sort of certainly have an impact. So that's something that we're keen to push forward, and I think is going to be the key direction of how this moves forward. Of course, if, you know, in a more London-based setting, you know, if sort of teachers within our current schools decide they want to move forward and set up another school, that's certainly the case. We're certainly looking to expand now through more this franchise model. And that comes on to really where people like yourselves can get involved potentially as well. So obviously the natural opportunity is to teach. As I said, very few, if any, of our teachers are actually formally qualified in teaching. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, we do provide training, and because the small class sizes exist, so roughly 2 to 3 teachers per about 12 to 13 children. You know, it's not so much about behaviour, you know, classroom management. It's more about just being able to teach the subject. But there's obviously people who are interested in getting involved in teaching. There's always welcome to sort of, you know, give your name forward. And there's some forms at the back as well, so with sort of details on how you can get involved. But obviously, as we're looking to now expand the project as well, beyond just, you know, just the 2 schools we have, you know, help with fundraising is going to be important. Help with sort of managing our policies and procedures will be important and helpful as well. People with sort of help with taking specific areas that we want to have, like the newsletter, or working on the fundraising projects with the children. All of these things, you know, there's definitely opportunity to get involved. So, you know, if you are interested, details are on the website. You know, myself, there are actually a few people who help with the school over here. Ramiz as well, who's here, is involved in the education side of City Circle, and their forms at the back as well. So inshallah, if we want to now, people have got any more questions they want to address to Max, obviously if you want to talk about City Circle Saturday School as well, but I think obviously it'd be a good opportunity to ask Max any questions. I've got a couple, but maybe I'll kick off with a few I've got, and then, you know, people can have a think and then put their hands up. I mean, 2 things. One was interesting. You obviously talked a lot about the correlation between the economic background of the parents and the education achievement of the children, because what I'm sort of thinking is there sort of a case to say actually looking at the correlation between the educational achievement of the children and the educational background of the parents, because that leads to one or the other, and that kind of comes through that if you were to, for example, look then within a school and you say, right, how many children, because obviously you would say within a school the educational experience of the children is similar within that school, and then compare sort of the children on free school meals and those who are not on free school meals. Do you find a discrepancy, and to suggest that maybe it's because you know, certainly living in England, you would think coming from sort of, you know, there are a lot of resources available, you know, even to the poorest people, and so it's more about, in a sense, educating parents. Is that maybe part of the challenge?
Well, globally and in this country, the biggest, if you had to take one factor that was the best predictor of educational outcomes, is the educational outcome of the mother. That is the key driver of educational outcomes globally, more so than the economics of the mother or the economics of the family. It's just that the education of the mother often correlates with the economics, but it also correlates with other things, which is really interesting. And of course, yeah, there are lots of exceptions to all these correlations. Of course, it's not that everybody is a proof of this rule. It's just about the numbers. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a really important question for a school like ours or any school. Is, well, if you know who the free school meal children are, then surely you can see whether they're doing better or worse than the other children, and then you should do something about that. And that's definitely true. That's exactly what should happen. And I think there's a couple of things about that, which is one, some of the challenges that sometimes occur in families with poor backgrounds are extremely challenging, things to overcome. So, if you've got a family and there's just mum, and mum has, drink or drug problems and doesn't know how to be a parent, we can know that, and we can know that child's a free school meal child, and we can know that child needs a lot more, but that doesn't mean that that's an easy problem to solve. So that's why there's all this data is true, is because there are some things that are really, really hard to overcome. And then the other thing is that no measure is perfect. Actually, a family with £17,000 who aren't on free school meals, they could have just as much deprivation in other areas as a family with £16,000 who are on free school meals. So, some of these measures aren't necessarily capturing, the actual circumstances of children when you look at individual children. And actually, if you look at, say, Chinese families' free school meal children, they outperform the average child in the country. So that shows you that actually there are other factors at play about, the family's expectations. Exactly. Yeah.
And then one other point is obviously very interesting. Talked about your school and the setup there. On the outset, I know you did talk about how some of the funding works, but just looking at it, it does seem to be a sort of resource heavy in terms of, obviously, I would have thought you probably have to pay your staff slightly more because of the longer hours, because just generally because you've got school open for long and so forth. Yeah. How do you sort of square that? So is it do you get more funding, or how does that work?
We get this Pupil Premium amount, which is definitely helpful. It does make a difference. I think that my staff, actually I don't pay them more. They, if anything, I pay them slightly less, and the reason why they want to work in our school is nothing to do with money. It's because of mission and their belief in what we do. So that's why they did work in our school. But I think it is expensive. Some of the things we do are expensive, and I think part of my job is to make sure that we've got the resources to be able to serve the pupils, and part of my job is to respect that I'm a servant of society, and that there's a certain amount of money that's available to do this work, and I can't sit and moan about the fact that there's not £20,000 per child. I need to work with what we've got, and I believe that that whilst it is my job to try and get more money for my school and for my kids, ultimately, if I didn't think it was possible, then I shouldn't be telling people I think it's possible. And I don't think it's possible only if someone gives me an extra £1 million a year to do it. I think it's possible because